Welcome back to Beyond the Blockchain with Scott Tyndall.
Hey folks, welcome back into Beyond the Blockchain. I'm your host, Scott Tyndall, here with Philip tonight. On the boards, Philip, we got through the blockchain portion of the show tonight, and I think we gave some people, some pretty optimistic news. They should be pretty happy about where they're going, especially if they've been listening to the show. But now it's time for the fun, Beyond the Blockchain. This is my favorite 30 minutes of the week. I want to start this, Philip, by talking about, we both have a good friend, Dan Brennan, who has a show every morning. He gets to talk to our listeners for hours, and he and Dalton do a great job. And But this past Friday night, Dan's son, Zach Miller, had his name placed on the McGill-Toolen Fieldhouse. They named it in his honor.
Awesome.
Zach he was one of the greatest dudes you could ever hope to meet. He was a Navy SEAL, and he was this impeccable human. He was like the dude's dude. He's like what you wish you could be. Like if you're a dude, you're like, that's the one. I only had the chance to meet him a couple times. He's served numerous tours of duty overseas. And he succumbed to cancer a couple of years ago, and just tragically, one of the dudes you just want to root for and win. But his friends and his classmates and his SEALs all got together and they started this foundation for him.
Yeah,
and they raised money, and they were able to name the McGill-Toolen Fieldhouse after him, which is just a tremendous honor. And the really cool thing was, Dan does Friday night football games for one of the local TV stations, and he happened to be doing that game. So he got to be there that night when this thing happened. And one of the things that always struck me about Zach, and specifically his friends, his colleagues, his SEALs, the people that knew him best, is they always said that what really summed him up was this kind of Teddy Roosevelt poem about the man in the arena. Are you familiar with that one?
You'll have to refresh my memory.
Yeah, let me do that. So, and I think this is important. We'll take some time to do this. Here's an article here that says, over the course of his time in the public eye, Theodore Roosevelt gave a number of moving, influential, highly quotable public addresses, but none of them as the legacy of the speech he delivered in Paris on April 23, 1910, which would become one of the most widely quoted orations of his career. The former president, who left office in 1909, had spent a year hunting in Central Africa before embarking on a tour of Northern Africa and Europe in 1910, attending events and giving speeches in places like Cairo, Berlin, Naples, and Oxford. He stopped in Paris on April 23rd and made his way to the Sorbonne, where fully 25,000 people packed the streets. At 3 p.m., before a crowd that included ministers in court dress, Army and Navy officers in full uniform, 900 students, and an audience of 2,000 ticket holders, Roosevelt delivered a speech called Citizenship in a Republic, which became known as the Man in the Arena. In addition to touching on his own family history, war, human and property rights, the responsibilities of citizenship, and France's falling birth rate, Roosevelt railed against cynics who looked down at men who were trying to make the world a better place. The poorest way to face life is to face it with a sneer, he said, a cynical habit of thought and speech, a readiness to criticize work which the critic himself never tries to perform, an intellectual aloofness which would not accept contact with life's realities. All of these are marks not of superiority, but of weakness. Then he delivered an inspirational and impassioned message that drew huge applause. And this is what's become known as the Man in the Arena. And like we said, this is what Zach's closest friends, his SEALs, his teammates have said. It kind of sums up his life. And it's something that, when you think about it, will really stick with you. So Roosevelt said, It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high accomplishment, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. That's pretty powerful words, man. It's something that, since being introduced to kind of Dan introducing me to Zach and now being introduced to this kind of motto from Teddy Roosevelt, it's something I think about quite a lot. And I'm going to read it again because once is not enough. So Teddy Roosevelt says this: "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and at worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." Man. Dude, it's pretty remarkable, and it sums up, according to Zach's closest friends, what he was about. And to be a Navy SEAL takes tremendous dedication, takes tremendous fortitude, takes tremendous... I think people think of these like big, strong guys. Like, yeah, they're big and strong, but they're mentally on a different level.
Well, there's a ton of guys that wash out. I mean, you talk about all the men that wash out.
Huge percent. And you know what? Those people are not less than. They just couldn't make it through buds, and they are still studs. They're still the best of the best. Mm-hmm. And just because they didn't make it through that doesn't make them any less than. Oh. So this article goes on to say that the speech was a wild success. Several times the applause lasted 2 minutes and was probably the greatest demonstration ever given a foreign lecturer. So eager was everyone outside to get a glimpse of Roosevelt that frequent clashes with the police occurred. Citizenship in a Republic, which we now know as the man in the arena, was called one of Roosevelt's greatest rhetorical triumphs, and it made headlines around the world. It ran in the Journal des Débats as a Sunday supplement and got sent to the teachers of France by Latom. It was printed by the Librairie Hachette on Japanese vellum and was turned into a pocketbook that sold 5,000 copies in 5 days and was translated across Europe. Roosevelt himself, however, was apparently shocked by how his speech was received, admitting to Henry Cabot Lodge that the reaction of the French was a little difficult for me to understand. This article tells us more about the man in the arena. It says Roosevelt might have been even more surprised to learn that the most famous section of his speech still resonates and inspires even today. It was quoted by President Richard Nixon in his resignation speech. He said, "Sometimes I have succeeded, sometimes I have failed, but always I have taken heart from what Theodore Roosevelt once said about the man in the arena." Author and researcher and professor Dr. Brene Brown paraphrased it in a TED Talk. and used Roosevelt's phrase, daring greatly, as the title of one of her books. The first time I read this quote, Brown writes in the introduction to Daring Greatly, I thought, this is vulnerability. Everything I've learned from over a decade of research on vulnerability has taught me this exact lesson. Vulnerability is not knowing victory or defeat. It is understanding the necessity of both. It's engaging. It's being all in. The man in the arena has a place in sports history, too. Before the 1995 World Cup, Nelson Mandela gave a copy of the passage to Francois Pienaar, captain of the South African rugby team. And they won, defeating the favorite All Blacks of New Zealand. Washington Nationals player Mark DeRosa would read it to himself before big games and before the Nationals faced the St. Louis Cardinals in Game 4 of the NLDS in 2022. DeRosa read it aloud to his teammates. He said, "That's a quote I've always gone back to. I go to that a lot. I really do. I've done it since college." What a great way to represent and think about Zach and the impact on the people he had in his life. We could all be a lot better off if we were more like Zach and more like the man in the arena.
Absolutely.
When we come back on Beyond the Blockchain, Philip, maybe we'll talk about some cryptozoology, some aliens. I don't know, something interesting. We'll see what happens.
All right.